Howdy, and welcome to a special edition of the Virtual Book Festival recorded on March 24th, 2020. This is produced by Book Festival Network, a division of Dear Texas and Dear Indie. This show is sponsored by Authors Marketing Guild. We're a membership-owned company that helps authors learn how to market and sell themselves. Also by IndieLector.store, the only bookstore that offers up to 80% of its sales to authors directly. And produced by Dear Indie and Dear Texas, where we drop everything and read both Texas and Indie. In this episode, we introduce you to Anne Redelfs.
During my medical training, I was moved by the degree of distress I experienced in my patients. And praying to understand why they were suffering so much, I became aware of their souls telling me why. And there was always a very good reason. I began to realize that our souls want us to psychologically grow, to mature in hearts and minds, which is the potential of every human being. And unfortunately, there's a tremendous amount of trauma in our world. And the vast majority of us have been exposed to some serious trauma from time to time, which greatly interferes with our psychological or soul development. What's been happening in the past few weeks in our country and the past few months in the world is a prime example. So tragically, we in American culture are not taught to own our trauma, express our genuine thoughts and feelings about it, and work it through. In fact, we're often taught to hide our trauma in our unconscious minds and move on. And such premature moving on means we can lose parts of ourselves. The parts who experience the trauma and their traits or abilities, which means more suffering. And in defense against the enormity of our trauma and loss, we may pretend that we haven't had any serious trauma, or we pretend any undeniable trauma had no effect on us. And we don't realize that the more we pretend and put away in the unconscious our trauma, the more unconscious we become. And the more baggage we haven't dealt with, the more that baggage interferes with our movements and our human functioning in general, such as our abilities to perceive, feel, think, relate, and receive spiritual inspiration and guidance. So if you'd like to know more about the impact of trauma on human beings, I recommend my book, What the World Needs Now: Healing Trauma in Ourselves and Our Children. And I have a more comprehensive book on trauma called The Awakening Storm. And this is also my story of my evacuation from my home in New Orleans to escape Hurricane Katrina. But it's also the impact of trauma on human beings. That includes recognizing trauma in families, in businesses, in the medical profession, religion, and even politics. And we can see plenty examples of trauma in what's been going on in the past few weeks and months in our nation and world. Some people are panicking, believing that they're going to die from the virus and there's nothing they can do. But there's always something we can do. As far as, besides isolating ourselves, we can give our physical bodies only what makes us happy and healthy. And the same thing with our souls, giving our souls what makes them happy and healthy. And there's also the other end of the spectrum, as far as there are people who are denying any danger whatsoever, whether from a pathogen like the virus or from predatory people. You see, traumatized people have trouble discerning friend from foe or victim from victimizer. And when we've lost parts of our human nature, our human qualities, or they're functioning in some distorted way because of unresolved trauma, we can be gullible to false authorities. They can push our buttons or manipulate us into serving their self-centered or even downright destructive agendas. And we might have no awareness of what they're doing. Also, when we're traumatized, we can reject true, honorable people because we project that unknown baggage within ourselves onto them, and we try to keep away from them, those who are least threatening. So these are just some of many serious consequences of unresolved trauma, which greatly impacts our lives and the lives of those we love. When I was in high school, I played Helen Keller in our school play, The Miracle Worker. And if you'll recall, Helen had an infection when she was an infant and was blind and deaf afterwards. And she had a teacher, Annie Sullivan, who was trying to communicate with her. And it was hard because Helen was used to going her own way. But there was one day when Ellen was spelling, using the sign language of the deaf, into Helen's hand, the word for water, W-A-T-E-R. And Helen was feeling every letter while her other hand was in a stream of water from the family water fountain. And suddenly she got it for the first time. She realized what was being spelled in her hand meant that water that was in the other hand. And her whole world opened up. She opened up to communication and knowledge and a deeper way of connecting with her fellow human beings. Her life is never the same. We each have a similar opportunity here because a similar form of communication goes on between our souls, our teachers, and the traumatized parts of ourselves, which are relatively deaf and blind in comparison. Our souls seek to alert us to these shortcomings of ours and to correct them. In fact, our lives' difficulties are our soul speaking through a metaphoric language that communicates what they'd have us know and correct about ourselves. So in my book, Illness Can Be the Cure, I talk about how our souls are communicating to us through our body symptoms and disease processes. And I guide the reader into hearing the voice of the soul. For example, each location of a symptom is significant. I think we all know that the coronavirus affects the lungs. Well, the lungs are the organ where we breathe in oxygen that's essential for life, and we breathe out carbon dioxide, which is harmful in excess. So if we have a lung disease, it's often communicating that we're not taking in what we need or releasing what's harmful. And there are many other possibilities. And the more serious our illness, the more urgent the request for change. Yet most of us have not made the connection that Helen Keller once did, that there's a brilliant and loving life trying to instruct us and help us. In our case, it's our very own souls. And these souls know us perfectly, know who we're here to be and what we're here to do. And they're attempting to guide us in every step of the way. Sadly, when I tell people what I hear their souls saying, they can sometimes hear me as being harshly judgmental or telling them that they're wrong about something. And they say it makes them feel bad or sad or angry. And although I don't know anyone, myself included, who's always doing their best and never making any errors, I don't see this soul communication as judgmental or blaming. No matter how well our lives seem to be going, there's always room for improvement from a soul's perspective. And again, when we have unresolved trauma, we tend to have perceptual distortions, as with hearing harsh criticism and blame that we experienced in the past from childhood caregivers as if they're coming from a loving source in the present, such as our soul. And this one symptom of unresolved trauma alone, perceptual distortion, can be gravely disabling. And when we're unwilling to deal with the problem of unresolved trauma and the many consequences, we typically create fictional storylines that make us feel better, such as, I haven't done anything wrong, or I always do my very best. And we can actually get addicted to these storylines, nursing them daily, much like alcoholics with their drinks. And I call this common problem of story addiction, as well as other addictions in my book. I talk about them in this book that I've written, With Every Addiction, Infants Are Trying to Meet Their Needs. When we aren't addicted to storylines and our minds are largely free of the baggage of unresolved trauma, we welcome the voice of the soul as wholly encouraging, constructive, and even life-saving, ever urging us in our journey to return to health and wholeness, our birthright. Amazingly to me, some people can even react in fear when I tell them what their soul's communicating. It's like they imagine I'm suggesting they listen to a podcast of aliens from other planets. This fearful reaction tells me that their soul is alien to them and they're frightened of what it might be saying. Getting past our projections and other defenses and being willing to listen to our souls with an open heart and mind is quite a challenge, as is getting ourselves to follow our soul's instructions. When we've had a lot of trauma, we can believe that life is about suffering, and we may not know that there are much better choices. As a people, we have yet to have a Helen Keller type of epiphany when we realize that our illnesses, whether a viral infection or heart disease or cancer, they're not random afflictions, but personal soul communications that are begging us to listen and to respond by making the changes being asked of us. And when we make these changes, we don't need a deadly virus to point out that our playing small is gravely impacting us and everyone we have contact with. We're willing to step up to the plate and play the important role that our souls are asking of us. Do you have any questions, Alan?
I don't actually, yes, somebody had a question, was asking if they should type it in there. Yes, Steve, please type your question. So your books are available where?
My books are available on my website, which is Anne Redelfs, ANNEREDELFS.com. And if you'd like some help to hear your soul and recover from your unresolved trauma or any illness that may be guiding you in this direction, please contact me at annethelistener@yahoo.com, or again through my website.
And we have just about a minute left, and they wanted you to share some of your background.
I'm a retired psychiatrist, and I went through medical school and then 2 years of pediatric training and then 3 years of psychiatric training. It was during my pediatric training that the soul became clear to me, because seeing children suffer to me was agonizing, and I had to know why. And I realized that it was their illnesses were trying to get them to grow become more emotional, to be more open-minded, more relating to one another. What we're learning right now during this isolation, where when I see someone, it's suddenly so precious to be with them. If we could only have that all the time.
And one last question, how long have you been writing?
I started writing after the Katrina disaster in New Orleans, so since 2005.
Authors Marketing Guild is a membership-owned organization designed to help authors succeed and learn how to better market and sell themselves and their books. Join us at authorsmarketingguild.com and receive so many benefits you'll wonder why you didn't join sooner. That's authorsmarketingguild.com.
Welcome to IndieLector.store, an online bookstore where the discriminating reader can find award-winning books. IndieLector.store is not a big corporation, so we can give up to 80% of the sales directly to the author. Help us support them by buying a great book at IndieLector.store. The 5th Annual Authors Marketing Event. 2 days of live seminars in marketing for authors. The only organization that certifies authors in marketing. Live and free to the first 100 authors registered. Sponsored by Bubblish, empowering entrepreneurs, and Indie Lector Store, paying authors for their fair share. Head to www.2020.authorsmarketingguild.com today.